everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations in the Future of Work. Today, I am thrilled to have one of the forward-most thinkers in this space, someone who is really thinking deeply about the solutions that we need to collaboratively face in order to help every professional reach their fullest potential. I'm going to pass it on to Gleb Tsipursky, welcoming him onto the show.
Thank you for the invitation, Vivian. So my background is that I have over 25 years of experience in consulting and training folks on the future of work. I got a PhD in this topic from the UNC Chapel Hill. I taught for 7 years as a professor at Ohio State, and did consulting, coaching, and training for companies ranging from Aflac to Xerox. I wrote a book called Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, which will form the basis for this conversation. It's available on Amazon and elsewhere in audiobook, paperback, or Kindle format. So check that out, and I'll be happy to talk about some of the case studies that form the basis for the book in the conversation as we go along.
Wonderful, Gleb. Thank you so much. And I usually say this in the beginning, but for everyone who's tuning in, I'm co-founder and CEO of Virtual Sapiens, co-host of this show, and my name is Rachel Cossar. So let's get into it. So how do you, Gleb, you work with clients across the globe, right? And how do you encourage your clients away from groupthink, what they're seeing in the news about who's doing what? And how do you guide them towards creating bespoke work policies?
So, Rachel, what I tend to do in those situations is tell them that, look, if you want to follow the crowd, you won't differentiate yourself from them. Now, when you're thinking about your business model, do you just want to be the person who goes along with what everybody else does? Well, how are you going to provide value that way? You're not going to provide value if you just do what other people are doing and follow their business model. You're just going to be competing for the lowest common denominator on price. And what you really want to do is you want to differentiate yourself from others. In the same way that you're differentiating yourself for customers, you need to be differentiating yourself for employees. And that's kind of one strategy. So if you're going to be differentiating yourself from employees, and let's say Amazon is asking everyone to return to the office 5 days a week, well, Amazon hires really great talent, but we're seeing that great talent fleeing from Amazon now that they're returning to the office 5 days a week. And so you can take advantage of the great talent that Amazon is losing by being much more strategic and proactive in how you approach hybrid work policies. Because lots of people want flexibility, and that's definitely a benefit for many, many people to have flexibility. So you'll be able to get great talent at cut rate prices. We know that on average, and this is average, people are willing to get a salary of about 8% less from a lot of studies for being able to work remotely. And thinking about, let's say, if you're a services company, your biggest cost is going to be your payroll, right? So thinking you can save 8% on payroll, that is an incredibly good deal where you can save a lot of money and you can come out ahead of a lot of companies, whether you'll lower your costs, you'll increase your profits. That's one thing. Now, we also know that from the research on hybrid work, people have higher morale and higher productivity when they're working, when they have some flexibility. So when people have higher morale, they of course have higher productivity, and those two things are related. And people are willing to spend about 40% of the time that they would have spent commuting, according to a lot of research, on their work tasks. So people will be working longer, they'll be more productive, and they will have higher morale. People will be happier, they'll have higher work-life balance. So you'll have a lot of benefits from offering some flexibility, and you'll differentiate yourself from the groupthink that others are following, and thus save yourself money. This is really an easy win-win all around.
Right, but it must take a real leader to be able to pause enough to reflect on some of those questions that you've asked, right? I feel like it might be easier to just knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, so-and-so is calling everyone back into the office, let's just do that. Or you know.
It does. And actually, one of the testimonials that was given to me by one of my clients, Craig Knobloch. So he is currently the executive director of the Information Sciences Institute at the University of Southern California. And it's a 300-ish people research institute in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, these sorts of issues. So they have a lot of talent competition from companies like Amazon and Microsoft and so on. And so he was telling me how early in the pandemic, I mean, it's a recorded testimonial. You can check it out on my website, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. I think it's one of the top testimonials there. How early in the pandemic, when companies were deciding, hey, now that vaccine is available, we're going to go back to the office 3 days a week. And he was like, oh, that sounds like a reasonable idea. Let's go to the office 3 days a week. And then he saw a training I did for IEEE, which is an association for electronic professionals, so IT and so on. And when I talked about, hey, do you really want to follow the crowd, or do you want to differentiate yourself and be a more attractive employer for employees? And he's like, oh, retention is a big problem for him. So that's one obvious thing that he learned about all these benefits for hybrid work and that I talked about. And he also learned how to do hybrid work effectively. So this is another problem. Research by our labs shows that over 70% of managers aren't trained on how to do hybrid work. So many people, just leaders, they don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, we'll go back to what we know. So once leaders are exposed to it, they can see, aha, I can differentiate myself. I should be thinking about this, not in this follow the crowd, but hey, I'm differentiating myself to my clients. I need to, in the same way, think about differentiating myself to my employees. But if they're not exposed to this message, they will, of course, not think about it. So thank you for interviewing me and exposing people to this message.
Yes, absolutely. Of course. So moving on to the next question, you mentioned that adopting a work policy that suits your company, your services, and your employees can help boost morale. What about some of the best practices around helping organizations build trust, a culture of rapport within the hybrid work model? And I ask this because I'm sure you saw this, but a few months ago, Zoom, of all companies, called people back into the office much more aggressively, stating that they didn't feel like trust could be built as effectively in a remote or hybrid work environment. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So I'll share an example, I'll probably use this throughout the rest of the conversation, of a recent strategic retreat I did for a law firm. So this is what was about 60-ish people law firm, and it had 10 partners, and the rest are associates and paralegals and legal assistants. And so there was the strategic retreat of the partners, so 10 partners. And I came there to help them figure out how to do. They were thinking they had a lot of flexibility, and they were like thinking, well, we're having a number of problems with our flexibility. Maybe we should go back to the office. And one of the big challenges was that they were having trouble with quick informal collaborations. And another challenge was with building trust. So, and those two are related challenges, because if people feel they can't quickly and informally collaborate, well, how are you going to trust that people are going to respond to you effectively? How can you get information? Like, trust is important to the extent that it impacts your collaboration, right? If it doesn't matter if a company has trust or not for just the sake of trust. It's about how trust impacts collaboration. So they weren't able to informally collaborate effectively. And so I came there, and I've seen this pattern play out again. I did a number of strategic retreats for companies. And so I asked them, how do you communicate? What tools do you use to communicate? And so some of the older lawyers, there were three older partners who are more senior, they had more status, even though partners are technically equal. I mean, they had quite a bit more status and seniority. And so they said, well, we use email, and email is like, we're not getting responses nearly quick enough to the emails. And the company also had Microsoft Teams. It was a Microsoft company. And I asked them, well, are you using Teams? And none of the senior partners were using Teams. But the junior partners, the ones who were in their, I think there was someone in their late 30s, most people in their 40s. So there were several people who were junior. They said, well, we're using Teams all the time, and we're engaging with quick informal collaboration all the time using Teams. And this was a real revelation to the senior partners. They didn't realize that Teams was the way to go if you wanted quick and informal collaboration. And that led to a conversation about how do you use digital tools.
Yeah.
And so this is the crucial point here, that if you don't know how to use digital tools, if you're not trained on using digital tools, if you don't have coordination in your company about how to use digital tools effectively, well, then you're not really going to build up trust, and you're not going to have good collaboration between folks. Especially, I see this with older folks who, of course, tend to be the leaders. Then the junior partners were telling me that some of the paralegals and associates who are quite a bit younger, they use Teams in much more sophisticated ways than even the junior partners did, and for collaboration. And we can talk about some examples, but basically we figured out some policies about when to use emails, when to use Teams, how to use emails. The crucial thing is to get alignment about using different tools. How do you solve problems around collaboration, and how do you use these shared understandings to build up trust? Because that's what you need to do. Trust rests on shared expectations, where you can trust that people will respond to you, and you trust that they have the same expectations around how to use different tools and how to respond. And so once that problem is resolved, then you can do a lot that's going to really help the company succeed. But if you don't have those shared expectations, then you'll tend to undermine trust when someone emails you, and when you email someone, they don't respond for 48 hours, and you really want them to respond in like 3 hours, which is what you really should be using Teams for.
Right. And I think that's such a good point. This idea of setting clear expectations that everyone's bought in on across the different channels that organizations use. Mm-hmm. Because any company's tech stack, whether it's a large enterprise or even a smaller startup, like the number of components of technology they're using in their tech stack is larger than it's ever been, right?
Yep.
And there are different purposes to each channel. Like I see this all the time, Gleb, with our clients, because some people are like, well, we don't want people to feel like they always have to be on video every minute of the day. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God, of course. No, like a video conversation should be happening for a very specific reason at a specific time, mm-hmm. but it should not be, the only way people are communicating across your organization.
Absolutely. So what I recommend for my clients to do is to decide which conversations are worthwhile of a video conversation, because video conversations are training. If you have a big team meeting, that might not be a good time for a video conversation. If you only have like 3 people in a meeting and you want to gauge other people's reactions to what you're saying, then you probably want to be having a video conversation. So those are the kinds of you need to have a purpose for a video conversation and not just have a default of a video conversation.
Exactly. And I mean, thinking of that, it's no wonder everyone got so burnt out on video during the pandemic, because it was like everything was a video meeting, and it was really exhausting for people.
And it's something that a lot of leaders don't realize, because mm-hmm. leaders tend to be more extroverted on average mm-hmm. than the typical employee, and extroverts don't get as trained on video calls, whereas their employees, who tend to be on average more introverted than the leaders, tend to be more trained on video calls. So that's another problem.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And this actually, so you've mentioned this a couple of times. And so the next 2 questions will focus on this mm-hmm. intergenerational, generational distribution across the organizations, right? So we know that today there are more generations represented in the workforce than ever before, mm-hmm. right? The age that people are working is going later, and the people who are coming into work are coming in, at a typical age, but in some cases younger. So what are some Because one of the other big challenges, right, to hybrid and remote work are those newer employees, right? These younger generations who have maybe never worked in a workplace, and it's harder, or at least it's been said that it's harder for them to really engage with a new company if it's hybrid. So what are your thoughts on effective strategies for mentoring these junior employees in a hybrid world of work?
Yeah, this is something that I'm working on with Atlassian they're one of my clients with whom I'm helping them with. And this is actually a conversation also with that law firm that I was having. So something that's really important is to establish a formal mentoring program, not just leave it up to chance, so not just randomly assign someone who's a buddy and hope that things work out. You want to have a year-long mentoring program for each junior employee, you want to have 2 mentors for each junior employee, one from that person's own team and one from outside their team, ideally outside their department. So the goal is for the person from the junior employee's own team, who should not be their supervisor. This should be a peer relationship. So of course, this is a senior person, but they should be peer in the company without a direct supervisory relationship to the junior employee. What you want that person to do is help them do their work, help them get into their work, understand their work tasks, and also understand the team dynamics of what's going on within that team. You want the person who is from the other department to help this person, the mentee, understand the broader company culture and introduce the mentee to others at the company. Because one of the biggest challenges of working in a hybrid remote setting is the weakening of weak ties. What those ties between different teams that were built up by people meeting each other in a water cooler conversation. So that's what you want to do. You want to have one mentor from your own team and one mentor from another team. And you also want to have this person participating in a peer mentoring group with some senior staff member and several junior staff members, several junior folks who can then mentor each other as well as be mentored by this senior person. So that's kind of another dynamic that you want to have that program. And these should be year-long programs that should be formally evaluated and managed by HR, because otherwise, if you don't do it, often these relationships will fall apart quickly.
So continuing on this theme, Gleb, of this generational gap that's existing in our workplace today, how do you manage, let's say you're in an enterprise organization and you have individuals who are spanning different generations. How do you manage that?
Well, going back to the example I was talking about, the lawyers, I see that in enterprise organizations and large organizations. Like I said, Atlassian is a pretty large organization. Applied Materials, another one of my clients, also testimonials on my website. You can check those out. And that these are large organizations. You have mid-sized organizations. You have small organizations. The key is pretty similar. What I see is a big digital gap where the managers who are older tend to have many more struggles with hybrid work, with remote work, and with digital work, because they are used to relying on emails. They are not nearly as inventive and creative about using digital tools. So like I said, in that strategic retreat, the senior partners were pretty clueless about using Microsoft Teams. Then the junior partners were using it extensively, and it was fixing their problems around collaboration, but they were not using it nearly as extensively and aggressively as the most junior paralegals and associates who are getting the most benefits out of it. And so what I see is you need to get people coordinated. You need to train people on having the same standards, and especially this is really difficult. We need to empathize here with leaders, with senior managers. They were successful for 20, 30, 40 years in the office. They know how to walk around and ask questions. Like one of the senior partners of the law firm said, well, why can't I just go down the hall and have a conversation with someone? And of course, you don't need to really drive into the office in order to ensure that you can go on Microsoft Teams quickly and have a conversation with someone who's signed, if it says that they're available on that kind of green sign, right? And they'll respond quickly. But they don't know that. It's not intuitive to them. So we really need to be empathetic to them and understand where they're coming from, and understand that it's kind of upending the status hierarchy and the power dynamics. So if it's the most junior people who know best how to use tools like Microsoft Teams or Slack or other digital tools, well, no wonder managers want to go back to the office, because they don't like being the ones who have to be taught and feel incompetent in these digital tools. So we really need to be understanding where their emotions are coming from, what they're feeling. And these emotions are the fundamental thing that I think is the obstruction. I mean, it seems simple to get training on these things, but you have to get over people's emotional blocks, people's defensiveness. And this is causing so much of the current return to office, is people's emotional blocks and their defensiveness and their unwillingness to lower themselves on the status hierarchy and be the noobs in using these tools, and have to have the people, the 20-somethings, school them on these tools. So this is a really big problem that I think is greatly underestimated, that I have to face every day when I am helping companies figure this out. This is a big, big challenge.
That makes sense. I mean, in so many walks of life, having the grace to be able to step back and understand someone else's perspective and experience it's a skill, it's a muscle, right? It takes time to develop that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I'm glad that that's part of what you're teaching. Gleb, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing such concrete pieces of information, of thought leadership and insight. How can our audience connect with you, follow your work more closely?
Sure. So you can check out my book, Returning to the Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, like I said, on Amazon, an audiobook, paperback, Kindle. You can check out my website, disasteravoidanceexperts.com, for all of my resources, my blogs, my newsletters, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with folks. Just tell me you heard me on Virtual Sapiens and that my conversation with Rachel. I don't just accept LinkedIn requests. Way too many people connecting with me there. But please do so on LinkedIn. So find my profile. It's Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the only one there. GLEBTSIPURSKY.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as always, to our listeners, thank you so much for following Conversations in the Future of Work.